The legal storm swirls around short-barreled rifles, SBRs, and pistol braces. These devices, once seen as tools for accessibility and customization, have now become the center of a heated debate. SBRs, with barrels under 16 inches, have been tightly regulated since 1934. The National Firearms Act was introduced to curb the use of concealable weapons, and SBRs fell under this category due to their shorter length. Pistol braces, originally designed to aid disabled veterans in stabilizing their firearms, were reclassified by the ATF in 2023. This reclassification turned millions of law-abiding citizens into potential felons overnight. Owners face tough choices: register their firearms under the NFA, modify them to comply with new regulations, surrender them to authorities, or destroy their firearms entirely. The sudden shift in policy left many scrambling to understand the new rules and how to comply. This abrupt change felt like a betrayal to many who had legally purchased their firearms. They had followed the law only to find themselves on the wrong side of it due to a regulatory change. The rule affected millions, sparking a major legal battle over agency authority and gun rights. The controversy has ignited passionate responses from both sides, with gun rights advocates arguing that the ATF overstepped its bounds, while others believe stricter regulations are necessary for public safety. The outcome of this battle could have lasting implications for firearm regulations in the United States. The legal challenge against the ATF's controversial rule reached a pivotal moment with the case known as Mock vs. Garland. This lawsuit became the focal point for gun rights advocates and legal experts across the country, as it questioned the very foundation of the ATF's authority to redefine firearm regulations without clear legislative backing. The case quickly gained national attention, with both sides preparing for a legal battle that could set a precedent for years to come. On October 2nd, 2024, and then 123 Fumonidrin, and June Ajo, Reed O'Connor, presiding in a Texas federal court, issued a landmark decision. He declared the ATF's rule unlawful, siding with the plaintiffs who argued that the agency had overstepped its bounds. This ruling sent shockwaves through the legal community and was seen as a significant victory for those challenging federal overreach. Judge O'Connor found that the ATF's actions were arbitrary and capricious, particularly because the agency failed to provide adequate public notice or allow for meaningful public comment. This lack of transparency and due process fueled public frustration and raised questions about the legitimacy of the rulemaking process. In response to the ruling, the plaintiffs and their legal team immediately sought to broaden the scope of the court's decision. They argued that the protections granted by the court should not be limited to just the named plaintiffs, but should instead apply to all affected individuals nationwide. This push for a nationwide injunction reflected the widespread impact the rule had on gun owners and manufacturers across the country. However, the initial injunction issued by the court was limited in scope. It only protected certain group members, such as the plaintiffs and specific organizations, leaving many others in a state of legal uncertainty. This patchwork of protection created confusion among gun owners, dealers, and manufacturers, who were unsure whether they were subject to enforcement or exempt from the rule. As the case progressed, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals stepped in and extended the injunction to include some firearm manufacturers. This move provided temporary relief to a broader segment of the industry, but still left many individuals and businesses outside the scope of protection, highlighting the ongoing complexity of the legal battle. Throughout the proceedings, the plaintiffs continued to argue that the ATF's rule was fundamentally flawed and should be struck down for everyone, not just a select few. They emphasized the importance of equal protection under the law and the need for clear, consistent regulations that do not arbitrarily divide the public into protected and unprotected groups. With the legal landscape rapidly evolving, the government was given until November 2023 to respond to the court's decision. This deadline set the stage for a crucial turning point in the case, as both sides prepared for the next phase of litigation that could ultimately determine the fate of the ATF's rule and its impact on gun rights nationwide. In July 2025, President Trump made headlines across the nation when he signed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act into law. The signing ceremony, held at the White House, was attended by lawmakers, supporters, and members of the press, all eager to witness this historic moment. The act was touted as a major step in reforming federal firearms regulations, and its implications were immediately felt throughout the country. One of the most significant changes brought by this law was the removal of the long-standing $200 tax stamp requirement for short-barreled rifles, commonly known as SBRs, and several other regulated items. This tax had been a cornerstone of the National Firearms Act for decades, and its sudden elimination sent shockwaves through both the gun community and legal circles, immediately sparking a new and highly publicized lawsuit. In response, prominent gun rights organizations quickly mobilized. They filed a federal lawsuit, aiming to block the NFA's remaining registration requirements, arguing that the law's foundation had been fundamentally altered. Outside courthouses, activists rallied, holding signs and voicing their support for what they saw as a long-overdue challenge to federal overreach. The core of their argument centered on the idea that the NFA's constitutionality was historically justified by its tax component. With the tax now eliminated by the new act, they contended that the legal basis for the NFA's registration rules had effectively vanished, leaving the law vulnerable to constitutional challenge. Without the tax, the plaintiffs argued, the federal government no longer had a legitimate reason to enforce the NFA's strict registration requirements. This argument raised complex legal questions and set the stage for a potentially landmark court battle that could reshape federal firearms law for years to come. Ultimately, the lawsuit sought to dismantle the very foundation of the NFA, challenging its logic and its place in American law. The outcome of this case would have far-reaching consequences, not just for gun owners, but for the entire landscape of federal regulation and constitutional rights. Gun rights groups argue the NFA's rules are unconstitutional without the tax. The 2022 Bruin decision requires regulations to align with historical firearm laws. They claim federal registries for common firearms lack historical precedent. Gun control advocates argue the NFA's safety purpose remains vital. They warn that removing safeguards could increase crime. The debate centers on whether the NFA's intent was public safety or tax collection. SBRs present technical challenges that go beyond legal debates. Their reduced size significantly affects operating dynamics, requiring careful tuning and adjustment. Balancing barrel length, gas systems, and ammunition is absolutely crucial. Suppressors add further complexity, affecting gas pressure and cycling. Owners often experiment with different components for reliability. SBRs demand rigorous maintenance due to high-pressure cycling and increased wear. Gun rights and control groups are sharply divided. Gun rights advocates see recent changes as a victory for the Second Amendment. They argue the NFA's financial basis was flawed, exposing unconstitutional elements. Gun control advocates warn of increased danger from deregulation. They view the NFA's rules as essential safeguards. Political figures echo these concerns, fearing a rollback of gun safety laws. The future of SBR regulation is uncertain, with key outcomes pending. A nationwide injunction could transform American gun policy. It would remove SBRs from NFA oversight, restoring Second Amendment rights. Alternatively, courts might uphold the NFA's public safety purpose. The legal battle could reach the Supreme Court, impacting future gun laws. The outcome will shape the national conversation on firearms and rights.